I was in Israel a week ago. Nick Diaz goes on Errol Hawani's show, which is quite frankly, it's a little bit of a treat, right? It's kind of hard to get a Nick Diaz interview, particularly a sit-down interview where he's focused, where he gives you time. And he sits down and he starts talking largely about little brother Nate and the BMF title fight with Jorge Masvidal. And when the whole thing gets done, and, I thought Nick was very cool. And I interpreted Nick as a guy who was big brother, who was asked a question by Errol, showed the respect to Errol to answer the question, which was, my little brother fought him. And, I could step in there. I don't have a problem with Masvidal, but he's saying things like he wanted to baptize my brother. You don't talk about my little brother that way. I took it as a cool move by big brother who was defending Nate. I appreciated it. But I read headlines when that was done that Nick Diaz calls out Jorge Masvidal. Did he? That's not what I saw. So I even went back and rewatched the clip. I was in the hotel. I had some extra time. But I rewatched it a second time, and I came away with the same opinion of going, no, Nick is not calling out Masvidal. That did not happen. I think I'm right as it pertains to his segment on Errol's show. But now let me fast forward to right now. Nick has made it very clear. He's calling out Jorge Masvidal. For me, great. Let's do it. Couple of things there. And Nick had talked about this on Errol's show. He said, I would not come out and call out Masvidal to step in front of Nate. I went to Nate. I said, do you mind if I personally want to come back? I want to come back to 170 and I want to go after George. Do I have your blessing? Now, that was a cool thing, and I thought it was an important thing as well. Because at some point in their careers, there was talk of George St. Pierre versus Nate. And Nate shot it down flat and said, that's my brother's fight. Don't even ask me. But I'm not stepping in the way of that. That's his fight. I just remembered that all these years later. So when Nick said that he returned the same gesture to Nate, which is, you good with this? Can I move forward? But now let's just talk about that fight. From a competitive standpoint, should we believe that that would be close? Well, if you tie one Diaz to the other, yes. And I think that you do tie them together, right? Nick's this big triathlete known for his cardio. I don't know that Nate goes out and does triathletes. He's also known for his cardio. But it seems that once Nick established that the brothers were these cardio machines, that then it just spilled over to Nate. Point I'm trying to make, I think oftentimes we paint these guys with the same brush. I think that just happens when you have brothers. And if you're going to do that, so we're supposed to look at Nick, whose last fight was Anderson Silva, hasn't fought since, but looked pretty good in that fight. I mean, he did move up a weight class. He did go 25 minutes with a primed Anderson Silva. Feel free to make your comments on that. I know you will. But when you put that in conjunction with Nate, who took 3 years off, came back and took out a former world champion, winning all 3 rounds in Anthony Pettis, I think if we're going to paint him with the same brush, then let's paint him and say, yes, Nick can still do this. Nate showed us that he was staying busy. He showed us that he was in the gym. He showed us that he was practicing. Do we have any reason to believe the same isn't true for Nick? Like, do you look at Nick and think, oh, that's a fat, out-of-shape fighter? I don't. That's not what my eyes tell me. I don't know how active he's being, but I don't have any reason to believe that he isn't busy, much like his brother showed us. Okay, so let's accept that Nick can compete with him. Where's Nick at within the USADA pool? Is everything cool in the gang there? Yes. I'm reporting what I've stolen from some other people that looked into it. They're saying, yes, he doesn't have an issue with USADA. He's currently out of the pool. He could go back in. That's the information I've heard. No reason to disagree with that. And I will tell you, I find something special to happen anytime you have a Nick Diaz fight. I mean, the laws of supply and demand just happen to apply to him. The rules of MMA have not followed Nick Diaz around for a number of years. They now don't follow Nate Diaz around. They don't have to be fighting for titles. And they can still headline and sell out arenas. Very few guys ever is that said about. But again, if we're painting the brothers with one stroke, they both have that too. The first time I ever saw Jorge Masvidal, never met him. First time I saw him, we were in Russia, the company called Bodog, and doing a fight. And the fight was like invite only type deal. What I mean by that is they were recording it, they were going to put it on television, but they didn't sell tickets and bring in an audience because they didn't want the word to get out on the results. So they fly in a whole bunch of guys. I mean, I think there was like 35 fights spread over 3 days. 3 days of television, 11 or 12 fights per show, however they worked it out. But so they've got all these athletes. If there was 35 fights and there were 70 athletes, they both get 2 cornermen. Right now, all of a sudden, you got 120 people. We're all traveling to Russia and doing this thing. But that was the audience. The 2 guys that are fighting, then everybody else that's part of this is who's in the crowd. George Masvidal's 21 years old, walks to the ring. Steve Berger was in the ring, a UFC veteran, waiting for him. Masvidal comes through the curtain into this arena that's dead silent because there's no one there. And he starts yelling at Steve Berger as he's getting the Vaseline put on his face. He's giving Berger the business. And he's only a 21-year-old kid. Berger's a grown man. Masvidal gets in there, starts ground and pounding Berger, postures up partway through the fight, and asks out the ring card girl. And as soon as this happened, I turned to Matt Lindland, who I'm watching this with, and I said, that guy, George Masvidal, needs to get matched up with Nick Diaz. And Matt looks at me and just nods his head yes, smiles, and we go back to the fight and the show that Masvidal was putting on. Now, all these years later, take that same story, you tied it to Nate Diaz, but you saw what a special thing that was. I mean, Madison Square Garden, The Rock, the BMF, go on and on. It just worked. Now, I do believe that George Masvidal is in that unique spot, that Nick Diaz, that Nate Diaz, that George Masvidal spot, where whatever he does next works. Doesn't have to be for the title. Could be. Doesn't have to be for the BMF. Could be. It could be anywhere you want with anyone you want. So when you have these guys that are super unique, I mean, they're unicorns. They're absolutely anomalies in this business, particularly in the organization of the UFC that is only looking for champions and contenders. And advertise that and market that and prove that. You get a couple of guys that slip through the cracks over the history of time. Oh, and they happen to be fighting at the same time. Oh, and guess what? They want to fight each other. I love it. I'd love to know what you guys think.
Uncle Chill, Uncle Chill. There's no bad guy like Uncle Chill. Never lost, not even around. Undefeated, undisputed. Oh yeah, here comes the bad guy. Uncle Chill, Uncle Chill. There's no bad guy like Uncle Chill. Never lost, not even around. Undefeated.